Good afternoon and welcome to the September 12, 2024 City Centre Core Development Advisory Committee. We acknowledge we're on traditional lands, a Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis. The City of Regina exists here because of treaty signing 150 years ago this weekend, and we really owe our strength and vibrancy in the existence of our city to these lands and the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked these territories and for whom settlers continue to be welcomed from around the world and call Regina home. No members of the committee are appearing virtually. I got no administration appearing virtually either. Okay, I'm just going to skip that part then. I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you. I'll give that one to Roberta. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Carried. I'll have someone move a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting held on August 22nd, 2024. You had to be here in order to move it. Thank you, Jason. Carlston, any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Carried. We are now going to consider item 24-9, the Regina's Warehouse Business Improvement District Vision and Implementation Plan. Jason Carlston and Jeff Boudelier, I'm going to ask you to take a seat in the presentation booth and ask you to present to committee. And we have support coming from administration through Ms. Autumn Dawson. Welcome, welcome. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for having us here at the committee today. Very excited to be presenting to you the Regina Warehouse District's vision plan. With me today, Jeff Boudelier is the chair of our board. I'm a director on the board, and Autumn Dawson is planning director. So big thank you to Autumn. Autumn was responsible for acquiring funding for us to be able to hire a consultant to lead this, so it's in front of you today. Her and her team at the city were participants along the way, and we will be through implementation as well. So that's why Autumn's here today, and she'll be partaking in part of the presentation. And also big thanks to Jonathan Pradnak, who was the planner who led us through the visioning engagement and prepared the document that we distributed earlier. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, the Warehouse District is a very large geographic area identified in red and superposed over the city center, which is grayed out. It's about 80 square blocks and has over 600 unique businesses, mostly small-scale businesses, local entrepreneurs. Carry on. What we'll talk today about is we'll talk through the creation of the plan, the process that we undertook with stakeholders, look at the key takeaways that the consultant found. Thank you. Talk about the plan vision and guiding principles and some of the strategic actions and big moves that came out of it and that were adopted by the board. Just a little background on the district itself. It served a very significant role historically from the early 1900s through 1929. It was one of the largest industrial areas in Western Canada, and at one point had over 50 factories and warehouses in 1929 when the city's population was just over 50,000. So very prominent, and that continued until about the 50s when the nature of industry and manufacturing and warehousing changed, and Regina developed Ross Industrial Park. So we saw a shifting of that occur after the 50s. More recently, the Warehouse District has evolved and still maintains some industrial operations, smaller scale industrial warehousing operations, but has become very eclectic in nature. The city, recognizing that in the 1990s, undertook a neighborhood plan which was developed in 1996. Unfortunately, since then, it hasn't changed dramatically and really doesn't respond to current circumstances. One of the reasons that this vision was undertaken and should lead to additional planning work with Autumn's team. So a couple other attempts at this were undertaken, but this is the first time the bid has been able to come forward like this with an articulated plan, and that's thanks very much to the city administration and their partnership. It's also a very monumental time for the district, given the revitalization project on Dudney, which really will serve as a catalyst project. we want to be able to be deliberate and thoughtful in how we focus our energies and work with the city. So today, we have a very eclectic community with a large number of the city's heritage assets, a range of uses from unique loft-style residential, entertainment, a variety of retail types. Also seen a resurgence in activation in recent years. We've been able to provide interim activation on the yard site, which has been very successful. And something we found in this plan is proceed forward. Now, some of the key takeaways that the consultant found really, and this was in consultation with property owners, we conducted a survey of the area, consultation with the city staff and with board members, was that really we're going to continue to see a move away from industrial uses because the nature of our district just isn't conducive to modern industrial development. We also identified sort of a gap in green spaces and sort of livable areas within the area, not just for residents, but also for visitors, if we're going to look to activate more. It was unanimous that there's growing momentum in the district, that the investment provided by some of the local property owners has created some momentum. I think a great example is 8th Avenue in Hamilton, where we've seen a local market, an everyday kitchen. Nevertheless, when we look throughout the district, some of the revitalization efforts have been a little bit piecemeal and reliant upon individual private property owners. So this plan is a way to be a little bit more intentional and deliberate with our actions. Another thing that is clearly, well, obvious is the potential for the yards. So it still holds great potential that we hope to work with the city on to capitalize to the best of our abilities. As with any great or good planning exercise, we undertook a workshop. So we brought together property owners, city staff, and our board of directors to pull out the Sharpies and do some work, some collaboration. And what was very encouraging was the amount of alignment that came out of the session. It was very constructive and very positive. And these are just some examples. We had 3 different working groups. Each group had all 3 stakeholders within them. And we came up with very sort of consistent themes. And this one I think illustrates it best, but in terms of where we'd like to focus, I think that was actually Eric's writing there, Eric DeWall. But we came out of that with alignment in terms of some focus on where we'd like to start. And we'll be touching upon that a little bit more as we go through in the autumn. We'll focus on that. Now, the plan put together by the consultant had a vision which is helpful and guiding, very representative of most types of warehouse districts in cities, in that it's an eclectic architectural heritage, rich culture, creative energy, and really looking at creating exciting experiences. So from that vision within the document, we also established a number of principles. Now, the principles aren't specific actions, but rather provide some guidance when we undertake either revitalization or working with stakeholders. We come back to the principles to see what, to test them against, basically. They're outlined in the vision document that we provided in advance, so I won't go into them in great detail. But something that we certainly want to maintain is an eclectic identity and culture within the district. It's something that came up through all of our stakeholder consultation. Economic resiliency, we want to demonstrate to businesses that locating in the district is viable and prosperous. Whether you live there now or where you're going to visit or live in the future, livability will be important. It was something that we identified as a bit of a gap in terms of green space or public realm. We recognize through work with the city that intensification is a goal both from a residential perspective and just a commercial perspective. If you go throughout the district, you'll notice that the public realm itself is quite varied. Some streets without sidewalks, some without any type of green space. So paying attention to the public realm is of key importance as well. We're looking at mobility options through the district in terms of circulation through vehicular patterns, ensuring pedestrian is a design imperative, and through any type of revitalization or initiative, we're looking at maintaining a sustainable approach. And safety and inclusivity is something that both the City Centre branch and the City Council have been very adamant on. Now, the consultant took all of the stakeholder input, and when he started to develop the actions, he identified a few big moves. And this geographically sort of delineates those big moves. As you can see, we've identified the yards in the southern portion, Dewdney Avenue corridor revitalization, and a core development precinct. And we identified a sort of central activity corridor emanating from the yards northward, predominantly along between Hamilton and Cornwall Street. Other areas that were identified through the stakeholder consultation included an emerging creative industry or precinct just east of Broad Street, and some larger sites that represent longer-term potential development areas. City owns some of the land in those areas, and you can see in the north side and on the east side near Winnipeg Street. Now, that said, it's a large geographic area. We want to provide some focus to our actions, and the board and city determined that the primary focus will be around Dewdney Avenue to the north and south of it. So the yards, core development precinct, and the central activity corridor. From that, we identified 10 specific strategies or actions, or categories of strategies and actions, of which advocating for zoning changes in a neighborhood plan were the first. Now, the neighborhood plan or development or update of a neighborhood plan is a longer term goal. Our focus for the next 2 to 3 years is on more tangible actions that will lead to visible or tangible results in the near term. An example of this would be widespread, quick win zoning changes throughout the district, as well as a deeper dive into the core development precinct to create more specific flexible zoning in that area that Autumn will talk about further. Also identified the need or the desire to really focus on incentives for the type of development that we want to see in the district and the location geographically within the district. Since we were going to present this report in May, June, but it was tabled, and since that time, Autumn's group's been working on incentive program for the city centre, which we're fully supportive of, and that's something that we would expect to be accessing. And of course, kickstarting the yards is a strategy that we just want to stay as involved as we can with the city in whatever capacity we can as council decides on what the future use of the yards is. Something that we have a little bit more control over is to improve the public realm. This is a great example. 8th Avenue and Hamilton Street has become quite a bit of an activity node with the local market, an everyday kitchen. And this is just an illustration of how attention to the public realm can really improve an activity and make it a destination or space. Another type of activity that doesn't require a lot of funds really is looking at tactical urbanism. That's really testing temporary action-oriented interventions that can inspire transformative changes within the district. So an example of that would be using planters on the street to create a bike lane, creating a pop-up cafe in a vacant lot, using temporary seating and a food truck. Regina Downtown has done some of these things and recently presented to you on how they revitalized an alley. So that's something that represents a lower cost intervention within the neighborhood. Other strategies include greening the district given the gap that we've identified in public spaces and making it easier to get around. So this is something that paying a lot of attention on in terms of Dewdney Avenue, looking at ensuring that we have the appropriate parking, vehicular circulation, and pedestrian safety within that area. The district itself is also very conducive to local arts and community, or cultural community. We have very cool spaces and typically lower rents than the downtown, and that's appealing to artistic groups. So it's something that we have currently within the district that we want to enhance and capture and leverage. Another action that we want to undertake is to improve our attention to advancing reconciliation. Some of the key activities within this would include creating an Indigenous business directory, facilitating additional Indigenous businesses to locate within the district, and to engage these cultural organizations to really bolster and make the district, see what we could do better to make the district more attractive. And the last two relate to reviewing and enhancing our programming. We need to continually assess the programming that we have and the activations to ensure that they're meeting our goals. Another thing we've identified is really trying to become more facilitative. The bid doesn't have to actually lead every event or plan every event, but we can facilitate others and leverage our property owners and users. And then if we're going to be implementing and taking actions, we want a way to measure these things. So we'll be paying better attention to traffic within the area, parking within the area, pedestrian counts, economic data related to timing around our events and the such. So we'll be building a better system around gathering and analyzing data for decision making. That very briefly summarizes the plan that we had shared with you, and I think we'll head into a couple of slides in which Autumn will be speaking to.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So I wanted to just provide an update to the committee about the work that administration has been doing related to this project. So as Jason mentioned, we were able to provide some funding for the development of this vision plan. This was seen really as a first step towards a new neighborhood plan and understanding and identifying what regulatory barriers such as zoning or outdated policies are currently in place and what was preventing movement or advancement within the warehouse district. So the vision plan was a way to start identifying new growth direction and allowed for initial conversations within the district. It was also a way to gauge the businesses in the district and their readiness to move forward with a new vision. So the plan was completed and approved by the Warehouse Bid Board in March. Since then, we've been working and collaborating on a way to break down the actions within the vision plan. It's quite large, and trying to understand how you implement a plan sometimes is the most difficult, to understand what's manageable in the short, medium, and long term. And so you'll see in this current state of work in the green in the short term, it identifies the priorities that we'll be focusing on within the next couple of years, and that is in an area that Jason mentioned called the Core Development Precinct, and it relates specifically to a geographical area within the district. So we would then move on after we've done an analysis of what's needed there to either allow businesses to grow or invest in the area, to the medium and the long term, which extends to other parts of the district, and the long-term actions related to neighborhood planning being 5 years out. So this work is exciting as it does address the concerns that we've been hearing from the perspective that the warehouse bid wants to provide certainty for investors. And when bundled with some of the other work that we have done in the corporation and are bringing forward, we're really excited to see and implement changes within the district. So I don't know if this next slide is here, but I'll maybe just speak to it. Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. So as noted, over the next couple of years, the focus of effort is going to be within this area, which I can never remember if it's Core Development Precinct, CDP for short. This will include advancing quick win zoning changes to align with not only the Housing Accelerator Fund changes that we've seen come forward in terms of housing, but also business development. And as part of the review of our incentive program that we're hoping to offer, consider how supports for businesses within this CDP area can be implemented for things like facade improvements and beautification grants, which we've been hearing from some of the businesses within the area, as well as the downtown. So implementation of public realm improvements, we'll be looking at opportunities there, such as street furniture or murals, places where public gather, and preparing for a workshop and design charrettes for this area later in the year. We've had some delay in that just in terms of staff turnover with the warehouse bid. So over time, these kinds of initiatives will be advanced throughout the district. And as we're working with the WH bid, it's important to recognize and focus and generate momentum where there's already activity created. One last but important note is the desire to advance a parking study later this year. It's anticipated to be broader than the specific precinct area, and it's an evolving environment, but it means that we need to take a look at people visiting the district as well as those who continue to do businesses within it, and look at some of the growing pains that are currently being felt, as well as some of the future focus work that is needed to be done there. So figuring out how to address parking and other challenges as they come up. And I have some colleagues here who are well into this work and can answer any questions as well. So that concludes the update from administration. So the work really is just beginning. This vision plan from our perspective has set the stage for the work that we need to do.
Thank you, Autumn. So just a couple of concluding comments here. I'll speak to the funding request and then we'll have some closing comments from our chair, Jeff. So in June, we had submitted a cover letter with a funding request, which has since been revised. Given the timing of that and the departure of our ED, we just thought any funds in 2024 we wouldn't have the ability to spend. Plus, this also provides opportunity for this to go into council's consideration for 2025 budget. So, as Autumn had mentioned, a parking study was something that we feel is a very much needed right now, given the change in circulation patterns, change in land uses that are becoming much more sort of intensive. And we've worked with the City Centre branch, and they're very supportive of participating in that study with us, and in fact contributing to the scope potentially, so that we can ensure that we have a comprehensive study that meets our needs as well as the city needs. So that's something we'd look for in 2025. Traffic pedestrian counts, we need to establish some baselines both through the Dudney Avenue conclusion and post Dudney Avenue. And then placemaking or public realm improvements been identified in terms of facade improvement, looking at mural and art projects, and undertaking tactical urbanism workshop and having some implementation out of that. And since we worked with the administration in June, there's been some additional work on the facade improvement grants and some of the incentives. So it could be, our desire would be for this committee to recommend to council that funding be considered for 2025 within the warehouse bid, as we've outlined here. City administration may be able to come forward and identify some of the funding that would already be accounted for within the program that they're looking at improving or accentuating. So that might be some of the additional work that would occur between now and 2025. But our ask here is for this to be considered and for this committee to forward that to City Council as a request within the 2025 budget deliberations. Now that said, I think I'll turn it over to Jeff for some concluding thoughts.
Thanks, Jason. I just want to briefly tie back, because we have so many important stakeholders in the room, why we think this is so important and why this neighborhood is so special in the context of the city. We've inherited as a city this incredible selection of buildings. Our building stock is really quite remarkable. We have these legacy buildings. We have more of them than many cities have. In fact, we have this asset that many cities wish they had. And a lot of that is owed to the fact that when this stuff was all built, we were sort of the third dominant economy in Canada at the time. So we punch above our weight in terms of the scope of this community. On top of that, as a city, we spend a lot of time trying to create things and trying to sort of spark things that we observe when we go to other cities that we enjoy and that we think have value. This strategy is essentially trying to just pour fuel on something that already exists. We already have the beginnings of a tremendously vital district with the type of building stock and development opportunities that attract small and medium-sized businesses that are trying to grow out of sort of a nascent stage into something more established. If you look across cities in Canada, the type of places that those sorts of entrepreneurs and businesses want to set up shop, it's in neighborhoods that look a lot like the warehouse district. And with the investment that you folks have widely endorsed in Dewdney Avenue, we're more ready than we've ever been to take advantage of that opportunity. And when we look at the economic realities of our city, the building stock and the investment opportunities that we have in the warehouse district make a lot of things possible that become quite challenging when you look at other greenfield development opportunities or tenancy downtown. And so we think that there's an opportunity for the warehouse district to play a really important role in the economic engine of the city by nurturing and creating the type of enterprise that eventually grows larger, becomes more dominant employers in the city, and eventually graduates to occupying larger floor plates and contributing in a more meaningful way to the tax base. So we don't want to lose sight of that. The second piece is the type of thing that we want to see in the district in many ways doesn't require massive investments. It's instead more about being strategic in terms of how we remove some of the barriers that are in place to folks that when they're confronted by the realities of setting up shop in the district or making an investment in a property can sometimes dissuade them. And the city has been an excellent partner in trying to remove some of those barriers and create greater certainty for the folks that want to invest and build in the neighborhood. Lastly, the opportunity to continue to build the quality of life that can exist from a residential standpoint in the district, I think is something that can easily be overlooked. We all share the desire of seeing a greater population move into the downtown core and the downtown sort of city center area. And we see a really credible path in the warehouse district with the type of building stock we have and the type of recreational opportunities that as we attract more of those types of businesses and development, it's sort of a natural fit, and that will eventually sort of grow into the broader city center and start to sort of see some of those benefits that we hope to realize more broadly in the area. So we're very excited about it. And the last thing I just really wanted to emphasize is we've been very careful here not to overstate what can be done or spread ourselves too thin. If you dig into the vision plan, it's really predicated, particularly in the earliest years, at concentrating our efforts and concentrating our investment in a couple of corridors, economic corridors, where a lot of the things that we hope to see more of are already occurring, where we can magnify and amplify those efforts without trying to do everything at once, which sometimes we get ourselves into trouble with when we try to do development and community building. And so it's a restrained approach, but it's an approach that does require some investment. Last point I'll sort of leave on, and I think if we think of our own travels in neighborhoods like this across Canada and in the United States, we'll probably relate to it. There's a very fine line with the types of ambitions we have for areas like the Yards and the beautiful renderings that you saw on Hamilton Street. If we overinvest in some of these ideas, things come off uncool or overly sterile or corporate. If we underinvest, they come off gimmicky or half-realized. And we think there's an opportunity in the warehouse district to find this really accessible, realistic sweet spot for a city like Regina, where we can set up the types of community activation points and infrastructure that really bring this vision to life without requiring the types of sort of generational investments that sometimes can take to achieve similar outcomes in greenfield areas or downtown cores. So it's very exciting. We're very committed to it. The full board is behind it, and we're very grateful for the support from the city that we've received so far, and would love to see that continue.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that all. I'm leaving your mics on because I'm going to open it up. Right now, one sec. Motion to put it on the floor? Understanding that we may amend the motion. I just need a motion to put this on the floor to receive and file. Thank you, Chris. Okay, folks, do you have questions? Thank you. Mr. Lane, Chris, go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff and Jason. Informative and important work, I would say. I'm curious to know, in the course of the work, how shelf stable is a vision plan for a neighborhood like the warehouse. Is what you've laid out here, if it takes us 5 years to do it, if it takes us 10 years to get there, is there an understanding about regardless of time and what else might be happening in and around the city, does it stand?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and, you know, I'll probably give a non-satisfactory answer of it depends what those things going on in other areas of the city are, but I think we've tried to take a view here that this is a neighborhood that can be developed, you know, largely absent clarity on what might be going on in some of those other territories. Now, certainly, the exception would be the yards. There's a massive sort of sea change effect that would take place if that yard site had a credible development that would take place on it. But outside of that, like I said, it's really about fueling what presently exists, and it's hard to see an attenuation of the demand for the type of building stock and the economic accessibility of our district in a community where the types of businesses that would occupy those buildings really do represent about 80% of our economy. And I think that's the piece that we have to kind of keep track of here. It's very important that we do a great job of attracting large-scale employers that occupy a lot of our floor plates. But it's equally important that we recognize that the vast majority of our jobs and the vast majority of our economy is driven by owner-managed businesses, small businesses, 25-person and less businesses. And we are ideally situated, particularly as our district becomes less adept at managing the needs of industrial businesses and they move further to the edges of the city. We are ideally situated to take advantage of that opportunity. And it's hard to see that going away for the next 20 years.
Maybe a follow-up, if I may, Madam Chair. Maybe put more bluntly, are there identifiable risks that you would see or envision that could knock this off course happening elsewhere in the city? What would be bad news for implementation of this?
Well, I mean, I want to be very careful not to speak unilaterally on behalf of my board, but I do think if there was a truly viable development that could take place on the yards that occurred elsewhere, that would certainly be something that could derail our ability to realize this plan in the nearer term. And certainly, if we saw an unfavorable regulatory environment with respect to the type of uses permitted in the district, that would also be detrimental to this sort of vision, in my view. Does that answer the question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. Oh, please, go ahead.
Jamie, thank you. Because I'm still fairly new to this committee, I'm curious. When I looked at the plans that you had on here and in the package, is there traffic to be able to connect the yards to the downtown area? And what I mean by traffic, I mean anything but vehicle. So when we talk about wanting to revitalize the downtown core, is there a way to have individuals access this Dudney Avenue, particularly the Yards area and so forth, onto Hamilton?
Jamie, as part of the $33 million that was set aside 10 years ago,
Yeah.
a pedestrian bridge across the yards, at the time it was negotiated that we got the air rights over the rail.
Okay.
And so 11-11-11 was the province, the feds, and the city. Money was set aside to do a bunch of the work. I think we've spent half of it, a third of it. Anyways, someone knows how much we've spent, one would hope. But there was always intended, part of our commitment was a pedestrian bridge joiner of some sort. Doesn't mean it has to go over, it could go under. I don't really want a tunnel. But anyways, yes, the shortest answer is yes.
Okay,
And
thank you. I
just-
wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, if we could just add, I think the importance of that will also be dictated by the use that ends up being developed on the yard site. A lot of parking exists in the downtown, there's opportunity for that type of synergy, so depending on what the yards ultimately becomes, that becomes even more critical.
I would just add as well, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that we have two very viable connections between the downtown and the warehouse district as it stands. They both happen to be underpasses that are generally not a pleasant thing to navigate at certain times of day. But if we have a compelling destination on either side of that equation, those become quite a bit more accessible and quite a bit more viable pretty quickly. And I think if we reflect again on experiences that you might have in other cities, the notion of having to traverse an underpass to get from the entertainment district to the downtown is not particularly unusual, and there's lots that can be done to make that a more viable corridor. So we're excited about what that potential pedestrian connection could look like, but we certainly don't think that the vision is dependent or contingent on it.
Jamie, did you want to follow up with anything on that? You're good? All right, please go ahead, Roberta.
First of all, thank you for the great presentation and overview, and like Jamie, brand new to the committee, so certainly learning the ropes here, but a couple of questions I had. So you mentioned that you had studies in 2002 and 2009, and we're going through and doing another one. A couple of questions regarding that. Did we see anything come out of those studies? Like, were we able to get any of those studies and the ideas that came out of that implemented? Are we going to find that we're going to get to a point where we've got these great studies and all of this information, and you know what I mean, we're not going to be able to move forward? So I was just curious.
Those studies, thank you through your chairperson, those studies were undertaken exclusively by the bid board and weren't in conjunction with city administration.
Okay.
They were also just independently done internally. That really didn't have the momentum of the board behind them subsequently. So they didn't really go anywhere, so it's hard to judge those. I think this would be more akin to some of the work that, say, Regina Downtown has done. And the fact Autumn's sitting with us today, and we were talking about implementation together, didn't have that back then.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm going to ask a financial question because I deal with this on a daily basis as well. You know, you're looking for a budget for 2025 and 2026. What's the consideration to go beyond that? So, you know, I think this plan is very exciting. I'm just, you know, where my mind goes is we get to the end of 2026 and we haven't thought beyond that, you know, what sort of additional funding or requirements will be needed going forward?
Through your chairperson, very good question. It's something that's come up in past discussions, even at this committee, and I think Councillor Hawkins has touched upon that. That's a level of coordination required for city centre initiatives. And I think city centre has just been, now there's a city centre manager, Jason Harris is here, and we see a very large coordination role to be played by that branch and by the city of Regina. We'll have a discussion later about some of that activity, but really that's the opportunity where I think budgets for all city center activity can be coordinated. So we didn't look beyond, this was more of a kickstart budget. We're looking at the next 2 years to really start making an impact, but that doesn't preempt development of something new in conjunction with the city and other organizations for the city center.
Perfect. Thank you. Through the chair, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Roberta. All right, I'm going to go since no other lights are on. Ms. Bryden, I see Chad Jedlick's in the room. Do you mind if I invite him down to hang out with you?
No.
I'm going to have some
I
questions.
actually was going to ask him to do that.
Hey, you're not auditing this class. Come on and sit down. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. We'll see where this goes. Autumn, or I'm just going to turn your mics on if that's all right. Autumn and Deb, and I'm interested in the half stuff too. All your mics are on, just so you know, so just, it can be a free-for-all for all I care. There's a mention made about the barriers. You guys have done, Deb, Ms. Bride, your department, Autumn, your staff have done some really good work as it relates to the conversion of homes, as it relates to, hey, guess what? You can run into these problems in historic or 60-year-old homes that you want to convert into a business. Have you had any discussions about the potential, given the uniqueness and age of a lot of these buildings, about building something out like that in terms of the how to buy and convert to new building code some of these industrial, and I'm specifically thinking about the brick buildings.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I will refer that to Ms. Dawson, but I don't think at this point in time we have taken those steps. Yeah, we haven't taken the steps, and I know it's a problem, and there's a little bit more digging that we need to do. It becomes more difficult with larger buildings and more potential for uses to provide that how-to kit, similar to what we presented to this committee last time, because that was taking one use and converting it into another. So there's much more potential when you have larger buildings, but something certainly that we have identified, especially in the warehouse district, and I know that a lot of their businesses in the area do run into building code issues. And certainly we are promoting to reach out to us and connecting in with potential purchasers or existing owners to see if we can help them walk through that process a little bit more neatly than purchasing without understanding kind of the realities of what that might be.
Right, and I'm even thinking of as simple as a checklist for when you go to buy, what you should be aware of, and just even the older building, like regardless of size, the older buildings to double, you know what I mean? Because we've had folks go in and buy older buildings and converting, and they've run into the...
Absolutely, through you. So we have had conversations with the Realtors Association to get them in the aware, to help bring that conversation up front. I know we worked with the former executive director of the warehouse board to raise their awareness that we're certainly wanting folks to come and talk to us. Like, it's that buyer beware, but come and talk to us to help you be aware.
It's a doable thing. And there's a piece of it, I think, from a board perspective as it relates to the warehouse bid. I'm wondering even, like, because I know you attend the meetings, and I forget, Ms. Bryden, do you go? Someone attends the meetings. Who attends the meeting? Who attends your board meetings from administration?
What time are our board meetings?
Yes.
Oh, they vary quite a lot. Usually in the evenings, early evening.
Who attends from it?
Oh,
Yeah.
who attends? I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
misunderstood.
That varies as well.
Yeah, that actually varies quite a bit, but we typically would have representation.
And I think sometimes it's the forensic analysis of what happened, which is, hey, we had something happen, you've gotten a new tenant, and here's the analysis of kind of what went right and what went wrong. I think it raises awareness, because you're right, every situation is different, every use and conversion can be different. I think there's the more you understand the stories, the more you can make the leaps for, oh gosh, like this might be that situation, to trigger it a bit better.
Through you, actually, just as we're talking, I don't think we actually went and unpacked, like I can think of a couple of projects in particular that would be worth going and just unpacking and maybe just walking through that situation with the board. We could certainly do something like that just to help raise their awareness. Like, we've got actual factual properties where things happened and cost money for folks, and so yeah, we could put something together. Sometimes
Yeah.
I think it's there's not an awareness of all the different places that we can help, and so when we're not reached out to, we can't provide that assistance until potentially it's too late, right? And so trying to really encourage purchasers or investors or building owners, and through the board, having conversations as early as we can. And then potentially having the incentive package available, so if there are hurdles, investing in an existing property, then we're able to actually have a remedy to help assist with that.
Yeah, if I might just add to that, I think this is an area where, in my tenure as chair, I've really seen city administration really willing and sort of stepping up to try to help us with this particular issue. I don't necessarily think it's a natural extension of this city's function, though, to sort of aggregate or broker the demand for potential development in the neighborhood. I think what does occur, though, is we get folks that knock on the door, possibly with the city, possibly elsewhere, and these folks that are sort of the owner-occupant type of investor, and let's say a property that's between $2.5 and $5 million, they're typically not a sophisticated developer or renovator. They typically have no, business with zoning and acceptable use and that sort of thing. And I think what happens is they look at that and they take a project that may have been viable and they quickly change their focus to a different neighborhood because the ease of getting the deal done is there. I mean, I know this to be a fact because I did the exact same thing with my business. And so anything that we can do to essentially, all things being equal, take someone's check is I think what we want to see. I mean, the difficulty that I have, and I find it difficult because I know with national building codes, et cetera, there's only so much that can be done. But we do have some buildings in our neighborhood that haven't been touched or loved in 25 years, sometimes 50 years. And someone comes along and the building might take $5 million to make perfect. They've got $4 million. And then right now in the current world, there's really no way to, the conversation stops there. And that building continues to deteriorate or sit vacant. And I think the opportunity that exists, and I don't have a silver bullet, but the interesting problem to start to dig into is what can be done to sort of capture that demand, capture that potential investment, and see it through to a place where an ultimate assessment of how viable something might truly be can exist. Because these property owners are just attempting to de-risk their investment. And right now it's difficult for them to do that at an offer stage.
Yeah, I can't tell if you're agreeing with me or disagreeing with me, because where you got to is exactly where I started.
No, I think we're in agreement. I'm just sort of saying I think administration's been really great about the barrier removal piece.
100%. My point is that sometimes it's raising the awareness of the troubles that you can run into to cost them out for the viability perspective, because what happens, and I'm not suggesting at all, nor will they know that I am not, we're not brokering deals, but we facilitate development. We facilitate permitting. That's our job, is to facilitate business. And these folks have improved exponentially, and they've been doing really good work. And so the problem is that if someone goes in and buys a building on a buyer unaware perspective, we're the ones that tell them no or give them the price tag for code. And so we become the problem, and we're not the problem. And so anything we can do front-ended wise in terms of raising awareness is where I started, raising that awareness, providing a bit of a cheat sheet, or hey, the viability of this is this, this, and this. You want folks to go into things not to be frustrated, because one of the things that ends up costing the most money is time, right? So when we've delayed, because we have to, for 6 months because engineering wasn't done appropriately, that creates unviability as well. So if you folks are willing to attend the board meetings and maybe do, if they could give you space and you guys can offline tell them yes or no, but these folks are willing to do it. Am I wrong, Autumn?
You are not wrong. We
All
are
right.
more than willing to do
All
that.
right.
Yeah.
And it was more a matter, because we have an example for the downtown or the transition area on the older homes. It would just seem to me that capacity-wise, coding-wise, fire code, like, we know where, water, we know where the barriers, where they start to creep up. Alternative response officers, folks, you know that we have alternative response officers. We know from a safety perspective, and I saw it within your report, we've got some sworn in last week. There will be further expansion of those to help out with some of the issues, especially as some of those things come to pass, but starting in the downtown, but it will through the city center core. The whole point is to get some more folks on the ground just to make patrons feel safe, and then again, investment in the street team should help, especially on an expansion basis for the compassionate outreach that's needed on that stuff. So I just thought I'd tell you that. Existing budgets, oh yes, partners. So I see in the report on all of these initiatives that there's partners, but the ask is only of the city. You got a response for me on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's challenging about it is that the scope of what we're able to engage on partnerships in is quite limited, because we don't really have these sort of definitive shovel-ready projects, so to speak. So right now, most of our partners are folks that either own properties or own businesses in the district, and they're very willing to come out and lend their support, lend their time, lend their perspective when we have an initiative like this vision plan and we want to create it. I think, by and large, most of them would view their existing contribution via their tax levy as their ostensible partnership. I do think, though, there are opportunities when we look at larger scale investments, like a potential development on the yards, to secure what are often characterized as economic spin-offs ahead of time by having folks not just sort of commit their support to these broader projects, but actually have more structured deals around, if the city is going to invest X in this big development, I will invest Y in the retail streetscape or a restaurant or X, Y, or Z. I think there are opportunities to be a bit more innovative instead of trusting those economic spin-offs to secure them ahead of time.
I like that idea.
And this request doesn't necessarily preclude that. I think murals are a great example of where, once a program is established, we would seek additional funding from those who would be benefiting, in addition to the startup funding that we'd be receiving or requesting from the city.
Okay. Like startup funding. Your levy right now earns you how much income per year?
You have the official budget? Yeah, the 354.
Yeah, I think our full budget is around 450,000, of which most of that is levies.
Okay. And the appetite to, as we're increasing a mill rate to get startup funding, and the appetite to increase the levy marginally every year exists or doesn't exist?
I think to date, our ratepayers have been supportive of our work. I think the expectation, though, is that we deliver on this vision. I think they will continue to be willing to pay for value where what value is conferred. I think if we continue to sort of kick the can down the lane on some of these initiatives, that patience might start to wear thin.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Mr. Carlson, you said I believe it was you that brought up in terms of the city's been doing a good job of removing barriers. Have you got some examples of that?
Yeah, I might address that question if I might. The biggest one has been this notion of the office allowability, and I get way over my skis on the technicalities of all of this. But a significant portion of our neighborhood is still zoned as light industrial, which is very restrictive when it comes to the amount of a floor plate that can be allocated to office. Am I getting that generally correct? And so that can be quite discouraging because, as you heard earlier, a lot of these buildings, it's not really where light industrial wants to be. They want to be where they can have overhead doors and larger truck access, that sort of thing. And so those folks are starting to kind of move out, and the folks that want to move in are, smaller service businesses or retail businesses or office businesses, physiotherapy, that kind of thing. And it's just difficult because sometimes the zoning rules don't permit that without an exception being approved by you folks. Now, I know in a large majority of cases when they reach that level, people are successful. The concern we have is I think it discourages a lot of folks that aren't willing to kind of engage in that process. So I think the city administration has been really understanding of that issue and very proactive about helping us work through that.
Another example, we've thanked Autumn and Deb and team, but we should extend some kudos to the land branch as well, and Chad and his team. Yeah, thank you, Chad. But we've been working with them for over the past year on interim uses on the yards, and really feel that we've been able to activate that fully because it is the city's land. So we've seen some great collaboration on that front.
I appreciate that. So I guess, Ms. Dawson, this is for you. Is the recommendation going to be to amend the office policy as it relates to the arts?
So the report that was to council in June, it had a recommendation to allow office policy. I might just correct something that Jeff said. It's not zoning that prohibits the office to extend into the warehouse district. It is the actual office policies within the official community plan. So the proposal to council in June did provide an option to allow that extension into the warehouse. That report was tabled to allow a consideration of additional options, which will be presented to council on the 25th of September.
Excellent, thank you. Do you have an opinion?
In the report in June, we did recommend that their office would be extended into the warehouse, and we still recommend that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Jedlick, I brought you up here for a reason. Actually, no, I have one question for Mr. Boudelier. There was a comment in terms of what could detract, development that could exist in the yards goes elsewhere. Could you give me an example?
I do not regret making that comment.
I
You
tend
know-
to write things down, so it comes back to haunt you.
Yeah, no, I'm starting to learn that as I come to more of these. I think the reality of it is it's an ideal floor plate for something like an arena, if the city were to invest in a project like an arena. And if an arena were to go elsewhere on a brownfield site or a different landmass, that would obviously mean that it's probably, for a city of our scale, 25 or 30 more years until a big galvanizing anchor project like that might come along that would be a great fit for the arts. So, that obviously concerns us. At the same time, we're champions of the city first. I mean, we want to have a great, vibrant, wonderful city. We just spend a lot of time looking at a greenfield site in the middle of our capital city's city center that any other capital city in this country would kill to have. And we just sort of think that there's a lot of stuff you could build on it that would make a lot of sense. And if that went elsewhere, well, we might be a little bit sad about that.
I assure the rest of the committee I didn't set this up. So Mr. Jedlick, about the arena. We're going to have Duny Avenue. So just to be clear, council voted that an arena could be located in our downtown, understanding it needs to be replaced and where on the list it exists. I'm a big fan of planning. And so we are going to be in a situation within, I believe, 2 years, 2026, end of 2025, Duny's done?
Yeah.
So how much pressure do you suppose we're going to get on decisions on the yards by the end of 2025?
Through you, Chair. I mean, in my opinion, it's something that we should be undertaking the planning for the yards, immediately, in the sense that we don't want to have Dudney completed and then be waiting to figure out what we're going to do with the yards.
Perfect answer. So, Councillor Hawkins, I'm going to wait and see if I get the... Okay, good. Okay, good. How much does it cost to do the analysis? What's the analysis that needs to be completed on the yards in the next year before construction is done so that we can understand the viability of an arena on half that site? So keeping in mind it's 17 acres, I believe the numbers we received is about 10 is developable because of park space and detention ponds and roads and whatever. If we need half of it to go to an arena, what's the work that needs to happen in order to see if that site is viable?
Through the Chair, probably the most important aspect from my standpoint would be a traffic impact assessment, just to understand, how the site could function with an arena in place there. And, so that is work that, we'll undertake. My thinking is that we can undertake a couple of options, one with an arena, one without, to see how the site functions. And that would be typical whenever you have a development, is to undertake that traffic impact assessment, to understand how, people will move in and out of the site before and after events.
Through the chair, just to
Yeah, please
add,
go ahead.
a lot of work was done through the Catalyst Committee
Yes.
on that. So I think the amount of work that would be required to take that further wouldn't be that significant.
Yeah, so
Correct. Yeah.
So, Mr. Jedlick, until we have the answer on the arena, I don't want any more work done on a full-scale non-arena site, because the crux of the question right now is from a traffic impact assessment. To your point, I believe servicing, we nailed it on Duny Avenue in terms of use. Budget-wise, what's the impact to your particular department in terms of the work that we're talking about?
It's a relatively minor cost, like in the grand scheme of development.
Okay. And the only other piece that I would be interested in from an undertaking perspective is that some collaboration happen with Economic Development Regina, perhaps the Hotels Association, in terms of what the economic impact would be of it on that site, and the potential uses that could exist, which I think you have a little bit of expertise with. The potential uses in terms of a little bit of a report, so to speak, that would come back that would speak to these things?
Yeah, no, that is something you'd want to understand is with the arena there, what would the adjacent uses be? And make some assumptions around that so that you can get a full understanding of how the site would function.
Whatever you put forward as a recommendation when we replace the receive and file, Mr. Carlston, I'm going to suggest that we add this in as point number 3. I think we need the answers on whether the arena could go, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not saying we're borrowing or building it in the next 2 or 3 years. Got some other things to get through done, but if we need to hold that land, then we need to hold that land, and you can still develop the rest, but at least you know what you're developing next to. Or we let it all go and then you proceed with the good work that you need to do. Is June of 2025 a sufficient amount of time for that report to come back? Because if we need to release the land because we can't build the arena, we all need to know. Is that fair?
Yes,
That's reasonable?
that timeline would be reasonable.
Okay, so I would like that put in the recommendation that comes from this committee to go to council to direct you to do some of that work as it relates to the viability of an arena. And I just picked 5 acres because, well, I've seen the plans. Let's do that further analysis. And if anything comes up on that particular issue as it relates to the viability of an arena on Dewdney Avenue, on the yards, this committee is open for you to come back and say, hey, something we didn't think about was, right, like something else gets, and then we'll just wait for you to tell us what those options are. Does that work? And then that does give you the balance of 2025 to either do the whole site if it's not viable. Is that fair? So that we can go into 2026 with you go ahead. I know you want to work on both at the same time. I just hate the waste of.
Yeah, no, it's a good approach. I mean, I think from administration standpoint, council has directed us to consider the arena on that site. And so that is the next work that would be undertaken, is to ensure that it is viable to locate an arena on that site, should that be the direction of council.
Are you suggesting I don't need to put it in as a recommendation to council because you already have that direction?
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
it's work that we'd be undertaking anyways.
Okay.
Just as, as part of the development assessment.
This committee can't request work to come back. Hang on one moment. I'm getting into trouble right now. I'm good. I'm super good. Yeah, we need that answer before everybody gets super excited about, oh, you're doing too many projects and you're, whatever. It's just, we have to do the proper planning, the proper investigation in order to know if that's the long-term hold or if am I wrong about this?
No, that's what we'd be undertaking anyways.
Okay. Well, that's perfect. And the only other thing about the parking study, which is on this as a request, is this not something we do as a matter of course for, like, all over the place? Do we not do parking studies and traffic studies and all of these other things? Nobody wants to answer
I can
this.
respond, and maybe Jason Harris can jump in, but typically that would be something that is put upon the development community for specific projects and such. Traffic counts might be something the city undertakes, but this level of parking study is something typically led by, like, a bid in conjunction with the city. But maybe Jason would like to comment?
Oh, sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at the area where the warehouse district is, and we've noticed that there's significant parking issues there already that we kind of have to figure out. So there is a situation where in the warehouse district, there's no curbs existing, there's people parking on sidewalks, we have issues with rail lines, so we have a bunch of issues related to parking within the warehouse district anyways. So we just kind of saw a natural synergy with this, where we would actually want to conduct that type of work in the warehouse district to figure out how we are going to identify the parking issues and then identify solutions. And we thought it could work very well, doing that work in conjunction with the warehouse district bid.
But there's no existing budget that exists for this, is where I'm trying to get to. Okay.
Not present.
No, that's fair enough. That's okay. Just checking. And traffic and pedestrian counts, we don't do this as a matter of in a traffic budget that exists already? I'm just saying, we have a $600 million budget. We don't have money somewhere that we could allocate, we're just not doing something else.
Through you, Mayor Masters, we do traffic counts, et cetera. I would have to confirm with the manager of the area to understand exactly how that funds are allocated throughout the city. And certainly I would say this is likely on top of what we would normally do in the course of a year in terms of determining traffic flows and requirements for signals.
And our request isn't necessarily new money, it may be just a direction of an existing budget.
Thanks, and I appreciate that. I just, like, on the one hand, with all due respect, the request for this type of, we're looking for public art, we're looking for taxable, like, we're looking for these things anyway. So on the one hand, a $200,000 request is, I don't think it hits 0.1 of a mill rate, to be fair, right, in terms of that investment. And especially to your point, and I appreciate it because it happens to us all the time, sometimes when we start the investment, we get the matching grants because of the momentum that it builds. So I perfectly agree with you. Very reasonable. It's a reasonable request for this type of work, and frankly, two of them are 100% the city anyways, right? So I don't, on the one hand, I don't have an issue. On the other hand, there's some pressure. But I think in terms of the investment that we made downtown specific to this year and some of that activation, it's a reasonable request for 80 block area. So that's where I'm going to go. The last thing I want to finish on is parking. The city doesn't own any parkades other than the one outside of our back door here, correct?
Through you, I believe that's correct. No parkades.
Is it worth, when we're doing this parking study, and I'm just going to throw it out there because I just want to plant a seed, that if the answer is we should build a parkade somewhere just off of Dudney, not on the yards, I want to go the other way a little bit, on underutilized land or taking down a derelict building within close proximity of a bunch of those spaces. I like the P3 that happened on the General Hospital site. And so is there a landowner that this may be a viable option if some of the parking issues are actually specifically related to the businesses and residents that exist within that block of Dudney Avenue? I just want to plant that seed. I am not opposed to publicly owned parkades or that joint venture idea. So that might have to be the solution at the end of the day. When we get such pushback about surface parking, fair enough. We have to have a solution for vehicular movement and placement for businesses as well as residents and et cetera, et cetera. So can I just plant that seed with you? Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Hawkins.
Mayor. The mayor went to one of two places where I wanted to go, and she went more skillfully than I could have gone and more gently. So I want to press in a bit on this. The catalyst, and I've seen this movie before. I have this vague feeling that I was here a year and a half ago. The Catalyst Committee made a very specific set of recommendations adopted by Council on the placement of infrastructure, one important piece of which was an arena. What have we done in that year and a half to deal with that recommendation from the Catalyst Committee adopted by Council?
Through the chair, my involvement in land and real estate is somewhat recent in the past few months. And so, certainly, I think the major focus of the land team has been on the implementation of the Dudney Avenue revitalization. And with that project, although a lot of what can be seen is on the surface, so at street level and street trees, a major accomplishment of that work is actually creating the capacity within the sanitary and water network to allow development on the yard site. As to any specific work as it relates to locating an arena there, I can't actually speak to what work has been completed in that regard, but a major hurdle in terms of getting development moving on that site was actually solving the water and wastewater issues that existed there. And so, so I believe a lot of the focus has been on that.
Again, not to be too aggressive, I remember we started talking about Dudney Avenue a decade ago. And I'm delighted we're there. I'm delighted that in a couple of years, we're going to see Dudney Avenue. I'm worried that we don't feel the same sense of urgency about the arena project. Now, what I hear you saying to us this afternoon is, and, push back, is yes, we have a council resolution and we're going to do something and we think we can do it in 2025, by 2025. I hear the clerk saying that we don't need any more resolutions on this, which makes me really happy, but I'm very nervous. What are we getting back in a year that's going to tell us about an arena on the yard site?
Councillor Hawkins, I just asked this question of the clerk. Can you, in terms of the undertaking for the report back to this committee? I think there's been a commitment to June to come back, which is allowed, I think. Is that correct?
Yes, if the committee, if it's work that's already planned and underway, it's nothing new. You're just reminding them that you want it on the record that you're coming back. So
I think
an
that's
undertaking
fair.
is appropriate.
Okay, do we have that undertaking?
Yes.
Thank you. How does the overpass tie into this, and would the undertaking include some discussion about the overpass? And I ask that for two reasons. One is it may be integral to the project. Two, I'm not sure the federal money for that is available forever. I'm just not sure. And I'm worried that perhaps we should get on with that.
Through the chair, I'll be upfront. My knowledge of the funding agreements related to that is, is rather shallow, and so I don't want to talk about specifics, but certainly understanding that pedestrian walkway that's contemplated would form a critical part of the overall traffic movement would be contemplated within a traffic impact assessment.
Thank you. I'm really pleased with all of these responses. Let me shift just to one other area. I read the report. I liked the report. I thought it'd be great if this could happen. And then I thought, but it's going to need a spark to make it happen. The chance of it happening organically seemed to me to be looking out decades and decades. So then I thought, well, Dudney Avenue is a spark, and good on it is. Something to do with the yards could be a spark, and the mayor covered that. But my question is this: where are the people and the investment going to come from to make the vision in the report happen? Or to put the question the other way around, it's a chicken and egg thing. If we do the vision in the report, if we do the beautification and all the rest of it, how do we know the people and the investment are going to come?
Yeah, Councillor Hawkins, I might take a stab at the answer. I think that's, you've just articulated what I view as the central challenge of city building. We take this sort of infrastructure-oriented view of it, and we say, how do we get an arena built? Where it goes, what it costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think my observation as a lifelong resident of this city is that our investor base are very shrewd, very patient folks. And even if we built that arena on the yards tomorrow, they would likely wait 3, 5, 7, 10 years to see how durable the traffic pattern changes were, or how much activity it spun off. But in reality, it's not the arena that's going to lead to a durable population of folks coming down and visiting our neighborhood. It's all of the ancillary investment that takes place around that arena that people flood in and into at the end of the day. And my view, again, I want to speak for my board in this particular regard, is our city is not really configured to take those speculative risks in lockstep with an arena investment. We saw the same thing occur with the stadium. I think there's an incredible opportunity to start to socialize what investors might be willing to make tangible commitments that would be contingent on an investment in arena on that site, and have, frankly, obligations to follow through on those things to make sure that we see the type of vision that's contemplated in all the beautiful renderings happen within 12 or 18 months of a project like that being opened. And I just don't think it will happen otherwise.
It's an interesting answer, thank you. I think it's especially interesting when you describe the caution of our investors. When I look at Saskatoon and have an uneasy feeling that over the last 18 months, the investment community has there stepped up. And I'm worried that if we don't start to step up, if we don't shake off a little bit of the caution, we're going to get left so far behind we can never catch up. So I'm interested in your answer. I hope you're right, that people will consider the ancillary opportunities that these kind of moves, whether it's beautifications or arenas or overpasses or whatever, will create. Can I ask one other question? It's been alluded to, and Jason mentioned it, he knows it interests me. How does the cooperation work between EDR and downtown bid, and what you're talking about? I mean, I hear you talking about building something solid, if you can make it work, in the warehouse. But that vision has to fit with, for synergies, I think, with EDR's visions and with RD bid. How are you creating those synergies? How are you making those happen alongside your focus, your right focus on the warehouse district?
I think that's a very good question, which we'll be getting at some of the discussion later, of course, but really view the activities that each respective agency bid does as something that forms a union of activities. So there's some of the things we put forward are very specific to the neighborhood of the warehouse district. Each neighborhood is going to have an identity, a character, and the such, and this is to really just continue to bolster and grow the identity within the warehouse district. Some of the larger economic development initiatives, incentives, and so forth, that is something that certainly does need coordination. I think, I can't speak on behalf of the whole board, we haven't had this fulsome discussion, but my personal view is that the city center branch should be playing a very strong coordination role between agencies, because every agency is going to have a little bit of self-interest, largely a citywide interest as well, but there needs to be a coordinating group, and if we look at other examples, the cities often play that role.
Thank you. I think it's important that the opportunity for synergies not be lost. I appreciate the whole discussion and the report. Thank you.
Yeah, I might add to that, Councillor Hawkins. I think one of the difficulties is all these organizations operate on pretty lean budgets, and I think desire to. I mean, we all want to be efficient with the taxpayers' money. But the degree of coordination and back and forth, particularly with boards involved, et cetera, all of that stuff, that coordinating activity becomes essentially overhead, where at the end of the year when we come back to be accountable to council on our budget ask, it's difficult to attribute the time spent on those items to tangible outcomes. And so we see the value in it. We think it's important to the long-term outcomes, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to sort of say we spent 10 or 15% of our time this year coordinating amongst ourselves. That said, I think each of these organizations really does have a responsibility to understand and represent and nurture the unique identity that really underpins what makes that community special. We talk a lot in city building about this notion, I really dislike the word vibrancy. It gets used all the time. Our report's probably got it mentioned 100 times. Vibrancy gets used all the time, and people struggle to define what it means, but for me, it ultimately means when you go to a great neighborhood in a cool city, the vibrancy is the idea that it has a clear and cogent identity, a DNA, a culture that is distinct yet integrated into the city that it's situated within. So if you go to a different cool community like Marda Loop in Calgary, it's part of Calgary, but it's got its own succinct identity. I'll use the analogy of a clothing brand. If you have a really cool, interesting, dynamic clothing brand that everybody likes and is excited to see, and you sell it to a big megalithic organization, it stops being cool very quickly because it's extremely difficult to manage multiple identities and multiple sets of DNA within a singular organization. It's just a very difficult challenge. Organizations struggle with it mightily. And so these bids have this opportunity, yes, to coordinate, but at the end of the day, that uniqueness is probably the hardest thing to sort of marshal as a city. And I think it's, we lose that at our own peril.
Of course, to pick up on your analogy, if you have a clothing store that offers 3 vibrant, unique clothing designs, you have a fabulous clothing store.
That's why guys like you and I look so good, Councillor.
Well, maybe we have a different brand. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins.
Am I allowed to make noise?
Terry, Mike, just go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. I completely recognize and understand that we're not here today to debate the office policy and that that's coming up in the coming weeks, but I do have a couple of questions. I'm curious if you know the percentage of existing space within your bid that is utilized as office space? Just office, not ancillary office for another use?
So it's an interesting question. The factual answer is no, we don't have that offhand. We could get that for you. The one thing I will offer, though, is we are aware that understood use and actual use in our district are slightly different things. And that's sort of the rub in some ways. We know we do have buildings that are likely offside of what's allowed. And so for us, I mean, that fact would be quite interesting, but it's more about, what's actually attempting to take place and how do we structure the district to not only allow for what's occurring today, but sort of nurture it.
Okay, and then just a follow-up question to that. You indicated that the current office policy is restricting growth within the warehouse bid. Is that speculative, or is there actual demand for office space that is restricted by the current office policy?
So we are not an official intake point for that sort of request, so we would only have anecdotal evidence. But as I mentioned earlier, and I really try hard not to confuse myself for the average Joe, I went through this exact challenge. I looked at 3 or 4 different properties, got to an offer stage on 2 of them, and it was going to eventually have to come to council to get an exception if I were to invest in one of those properties, and consequently I purchased a property in a different neighborhood. And so I know from the business community that takes place in other corners. Fortunately, that investment isn't leaving Regina in general, but I think there's reason to believe that is real. The bigger trick, frankly, is not just our district, it's the city as a whole. How do we encourage folks that are, in particular owner occupants are really quite intriguing to me, because generally speaking, they'll invest in these properties at a level that exceeds the economics that an investor would choose to invest at. It's more of a passion project or a statement piece. We have some exceptional buildings in our neighborhood. Brownstone Health I'll use as an example, where the owner of that building has likely invested in that building at a level that exceeds what a speculative investor might have elected to do. So, we think that because our building stock is well configured for those sizes of businesses, those footprints, those purchase points, that we've really got an opportunity there. It's just not in a lot of non-office uses.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. Okay. I don't have any other lights on. I'm just going to ask the Deputy City Clerk, she had some recommendations. She's got, in receipt of your letter, Jason, and so she's got a recommendation for what the actual motion should look like. Who made the motion and put it on the floor? Thank you, Chris. So you would have to withdraw and replace. I just got to double check. Does this satisfy what you need?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry. Sorry, Jeff, I've got your mic on. Oh.
Yes, we're supportive of this, thank you.
Would you be prepared to make that? Okay, so we withdraw the receive and file, which put it on the floor. We replace with this decision. Are there any opposed? Carried. That was easy, wasn't it, guys? All right. I need a resolution for, can I have a motion to move to private session? Thanks, Terry. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Done.